So, if a politician today stood up and just said, hey, let's instantly drop all of our tariffs.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Just let's open our borders completely. Let's let a foreign superpower just flood our local markets with extremely cheap manufactured goods.
I mean, that would be absolute political suicide.
Totally. They would be laughed off the stage because we all know exactly what picture comes to mind when you say that.
Yeah, you picture the Rust Belt.
Exactly. We picture abandoned towns. We picture hollowed out middle classes and just entire communities absolutely devastated by a sudden influx of foreign competition.
It is a really terrifying image, and it's one that completely dominates our modern political landscape.
Hmm.
I mean, the fear of the open door is arguably the single most powerful economic anxiety of our time.
It really is. We just operate on this fundamental assumption, right? We assume that when a country opens its doors to a cheaper, stronger foreign powerhouse, its own fragile domestic industries are going to be instantly annihilated.
Right. It just feels like undeniable common sense.
Yeah, but what if I told you that historical data, like actual hard numbers from one of the most dramatic economic shifts in human history, proves that this assumption is a massive fatal illusion?
It's a total misdiagnosis of how the global machine actually functions.
Yes. And when you look at the real historical evidence, it just completely shatters everything we think we know about economic survival.
It really does. It's wild.
So here is the big question for today's deep dive. Why does the shock of global trade today seem to just rip apart the middle class, hollow out industrial towns, and tear society apart, while opening the borders 160 years ago actually brought on an economic golden age?
It's such a crazy contrast.
It is. So today we are breaking down a heavyweight, just fascinating study by three economists, Stéphane Becuwe, Bertrand Blancheton, and Christopher M. Meissner.
A really brilliant team.
Yeah, and we are going to unpack a completely forgotten 1860 economic earthquake in France, because this study reveals the hidden underlying logic of how you actually survive a foreign economic invasion.
Right, and it forces us to look at France during a highly volatile period.
Oh, absolutely.
This was a country that suddenly, almost literally overnight, threw its doors completely open to the ultimate world factory of the time.
The undisputed heavyweight champion of the 19th century.
Exactly. Great Britain.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand how crazy this was, we have to paint a picture for you of just how terrified France was of Britain before 1860.
Oh, they were petrified.
Right. I mean, France wasn't just cautious about trade. They were incredibly paranoid. They were like the ultimate protectionist state.
They had erected what was essentially an economic iron curtain.
Wow.
Yeah, we are talking about 58 strict absolute import prohibitions. 58.
Wait, a total ban.
A total ban. Not just high taxes on imports, but absolute unbending bans.
Meaning it was straight up illegal to bring a British cotton shirt into France.
Exactly. Illegal. It was considered contraband.
That is insane.
If you tried to bring British cotton or British woolen yarn or British iron across the English Channel, the French customs agents would just seize it.
They really believed blocking British goods was the only way their nation could survive.
They did. You have to remember what Britain actually was in the 1850s.
Right, the Industrial Revolution was booming.
Yeah, they had the steam engine. They had these massive, highly mechanized textile mills in Manchester. They had endless supplies of coal and iron.
So the French just looked across the water and thought, well, we're doomed if we open up.
Basically, yeah, they thought if we let even a tiny fraction of that cheap British industrial output cross our borders, our entire manufacturing sector will instantly vaporize.
So the French narrative was just build the walls as high as humanly possible, or we literally die.
That was the absolute consensus of the French industrial elite. They were absolutely terrified of the British machine.
But then a single man decides to rewrite the destiny of the entire nation, and he does it in absolute airtight secrecy.
Emperor Napoleon III. He looked at this deeply entrenched protectionist system and realized, it was actually holding France back from modernizing.
Because they were just stagnating behind the wall.
Exactly. But he also knew that if he brought this up for a public debate in the French parliament, the industrial bosses would tear him apart.
Oh, the lobbying power must have been crazy.
The lobbying power of the French textile and iron magnates was just massive. They controlled everything.
So he just bypassed Parliament entirely? I mean, that sounds like a coup.
It was a coup without gunpowder.
Right.
Precisely.
Wow.
Napoleon III utilized this very specific clause in the French Constitution that allowed the emperor to sign international treaties without any parliamentary approval.
So he didn't have to ask anyone.
Nobody. In 1860, with only 5 other officials even knowing what was happening, he negotiated and signed the Cobden Chevalier Treaty with Britain.
Just 6 men in a room.
Just 6 men negotiating in total secrecy. And with the stroke of a pen, they just flipped the global economy upside down.
I just want to dwell on that for a second. Because 6 men sitting in a room secretly decide to dismantle the entire defense grid of a major European power.
Yeah.
The moment they announced this to the public, the reaction must have been apocalyptic.
Oh, the panic was absolute. It was chaos. Overnight, dozens of those core manufacturing import bans.
The bans that kept them alive.
Right, the very bans that French factory owners believed were their only lifeline were abolished.
Poof. Just gone.
Gone. Replaced by tariffs, yes, but at a fraction of the cost. Everyone in the French business world thought this was the doomsday countdown for French industry.
Wait, hold on, though. You're telling me you bypassed Parliament to let the enemy's cheap goods in overnight?
Yep.
Isn't that political and economic suicide? I mean, why didn't the country literally burn down? If you tried this today, you'd have millions of people rioting in the streets by the weekend.
You really would. But to understand why the country didn't burn, you have to look closely at the data from this study.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
You have to see how insanely steep the drop in protection actually was. Because it wasn't some gentle, phased-out transition.
It wasn't like a 10-year plan.
No, it was a cliff. The defense walls didn't just crack, they vaporized.
Let's talk about the numbers these economists pulled from the archives, because it's shocking. The average tariffs on 6 core manufactured goods went into a cliff-like free fall.
A total nosedive.
They dropped from around 13% to 7% almost instantly.
And remember, that's just the average tariff rate.
Yeah.
Absolute bans, the actual laws that said 0 British wool, 0 British cotton, 0 British glass.
Those were completely erased.
Erased and replaced by these incredibly low, easily payable tariffs.
So by all traditional economic logic, a total tsunami of cheap, mass-produced British goods should have drowned the French market within weeks.
Should have been an absolute bloodbath.
Hundreds of thousands of French textile workers, people who relied on these slower artisanal manufacturing methods, they should have been begging on the streets.
And that is exactly what the politicians predicted would happen.
Enter Adolphe Thiers.
Yes, Adolphe Thiers. He was a massive figure in French politics and a super staunch protectionist.
And he was screaming that their manufacturing was wantonly ruined.
He literally stood up and said the emperor had ruined them for absolutely no reason.
He's the opposition leader, right? So he was essentially acting as the voice of these terrified factory owners.
Yes, Thiers was articulating the exact same fear we hear today on the news when a factory closes.
He predicted mass layoffs.
Mass layoffs, the death of the middle-class worker, the complete hollowing out of industrial towns.
But what's fascinating here is, well, the actual data shows something utterly terrifying for traditional economists.
Oh, completely.
Because the plunge in tariffs wasn't the scary part. The result was the expected doom. It just never arrived.
Not even a little bit. The researchers, Becuwe, Blancheton, and Meissner, they dug deep into the macroeconomic data of the era.
And what did they find?
They found absolutely nothing resembling a collapse.
That is wild. The mass layoffs Thiers predicted never happened. The massive worker riots and burning of factories. Total silence.
Instead, if you look at the total trade to GDP ratio, which is the main metric economists use to see how much a country is engaging in global commerce.
Right, relative to its total economic size.
Exactly. That line smoothly skyrockets after 1860. The French economy didn't die. It surged.
France didn't die. It leveled up. But I have to push back here because logically this feels mathematically impossible.
I know, it really does.
So what does this all mean? How does a weaker player with slower technology and way higher costs survive being thrown into a meat grinder with the British Empire?
It's the million-dollar question.
Because if the British are making shirts at half the price, how do French shirt makers stay in business?
They survive because of an anomaly, a suffocating, highly bizarre anomaly in the data that completely breaks our standard textbook understanding of trade.
Let's explain that traditional understanding first, just so we have a baseline.
Sure. Traditional economics says if a foreign competitor floods your market with cheap imports, your domestic producers lose market share.
Therefore, your exports must collapse.
Right. It is treated as a rigid zero-sum game. The enemy floods in, you retreat, you shrink, you die.
If Britain exports 100,000 tons of cheap cotton cloth to France, the traditional model assumes French cotton producers will sell 100,000 fewer tons.
Exactly. But the real data from the paper shows the exact opposite.
This is the face-slapping moment.
It really is. For the top 6 manufactured products, the import line from Britain shot straight up, just as everyone expected.
Right.
But the export line, the goods France was selling to the rest of the world, and even back to Britain,
That line climbed right alongside it.
yes, they climbed together.
That is just insane. They took a direct, brutal hit from the British industrial machine, but instead of being wiped out, they fought back on the exact same turf.
They imported and exported at the very same time within the very same industries.
They never retreated, they just stood their ground.
They completely stood their ground.
But how? You have to explain the actual mechanics of this to me, because if I own a small factory making fabric and a massive British conglomerate opens up selling fabric across the street for half the price, I'm going out of business.
Of course you are if you keep doing the same thing.
So how do you export to the very country that is supposedly crushing you?
You change the rules of the game, you stop fighting their war.
Okay, I like that.
The British were fighting a war of mass scale, standardization, and cheap volume. If the French tried to fight that specific war, they would have been absolutely slaughtered.
So it's not a fight to the death over the same identical product. It's about becoming kings of your own turf.
Exactly. The researchers reveal a chart that is basically a complete face-slap to common sense. It is the awakening of what we can call ecosystem trade.
Ecosystem trade. Let's dig into that.
The paper tracks this metric, an ecosystem survival metric, basically. And without getting bogged down in the academic math, let's translate this into how an industry survives.
Right. Let's explain this scale for you listening. Think of this index on a scale from 0 to 100.
Okay.
A score of 0 means your industry only does one thing. It either exclusively imports or it exclusively exports. If you score a 0, you are entirely one-sided.
Right.
A score of 100 means you are in perfect balance. You export exactly as much as you import within the exact same specific industry.
Perfect. So in the 1850s, before the treaty, the French textile industry scored under 15 on this scale.
Very low.
Very low. Mostly they just tried to export whatever they could while legally banning everything else from coming in.
But after the 1860 treaty,
This metric goes absolutely crazy. It spikes from under 15 to nearly 40 by 1872.
that is a massive jump. The French industries didn't just survive, their score rocketed to 40,
Meaning they were suddenly fighting back and exporting almost as much as they were taking in.
all within the exact same sector.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this wasn't two armies colliding on an open field where one army just has to be destroyed.
It was an ecosystem dividing.
Exactly. They found a new ecological niche.
This is the massive reveal of the paper. This is the holy crap moment.
It really is.
Walk me through the physical mechanics on the ground, because when that cheap British cloth flooded in, what did the actual French factory owners and the workers actually do?
Well, they didn't do what everyone expected.
They didn't drop their looms, lock up their shops, and run off to the countryside to become potato farmers.
Not at all. They didn't change careers. Let's look at a hypothetical French textile factory in Lyon around 1816.
Okay, paint the picture.
The owner sees these massive bales of British cotton arriving at the port, and it's incredibly cheap. It's standard gray, undyed, highly basic mass-market cloth.
Boring but cheap.
Right. So instead of trying to weave that basic cloth himself, which he knows he can't do as cheaply as the British,
He buys it.
he buys it.
Wait. The French textile workers became the customers of their own competitors.
Yes, exactly. They bought the cheap, standard British mass-market cloth for themselves.
Oh, wow.
They used the cheap imports as their own raw material.
Yeah.
They took a look at this blank canvas the British produced so efficiently, and they basically said, great, you saved us the trouble of spinning and weaving the basic stuff.
And then they dedicated all their energy, all their capital, and all their traditional artisanal skill to making highly specialized, luxury, uniquely French printed cloth.
Yes. They focused on complex chemical dyes, intricate patterns, high-fashion designs. They moved entirely up the value chain.
They stopped being weavers of basic gray cloth and became designers, dyers, and finishers of luxury fabrics.
And here's the most brilliant part of all of this.
Okay.
Who do you think they sold these beautiful, high-end, high-margin luxury printed cloths to?
Oh my God, they sold it right back to the British.
They sold it right back to the British.
That is unbelievable.
The British middle and upper classes were getting incredibly wealthy from their own industrial revolution, and what do rich people want? They want luxury goods.
They wanted French fashion.
Exactly. So the French took the enemy's cheap goods, saved their own money and labor on the boring basics, added immense value through design and quality, and sold it back to the enemy at a premium.
That is absolute genius. They used the strength of the British industrial machine to fuel their own luxury market.
The economists in this study call this the miracle of the smooth adjustment.
Smooth adjustment. And this brings us to a massive, painful contrast.
It does.
Because we have to talk about the pain of modern trade. If you look at why today's workers suffer so much, it's a completely different story.
It is entirely different.
Why is the modern Rust Belt so devastated? Because forcing a 50-year-old steel worker in Ohio, whose factory just shut down due to cheap foreign steel, to suddenly become a software programmer or a solar panel installer,
It's anti-human.
it is violent. It destroys communities. It strips people of their dignity, their identity, and the generational skills they have built up over decades.
Modern economic shocks often force people to completely abandon their industry, their town, and their way of life. It's devastating.
But 1860s France achieved the gentlest way to cut off an arm to survive, a truly smooth adjustment.
Because of how the trade evolved. The paper looks at another piece of data, tracking how much of the new post-treaty trade growth happened within the exact same industries.
Right.
And the data is undeniable. The metric jumps from a low 9.9 before the treaty to a massive 42.67 after.
So what does that 42.67 actually translate to for a human being on the ground?
It means the resources, the factories, the machines, and most importantly, the laborers.
The actual people.
Yes, the people stayed in the exact same industry. The French dyer didn't have to learn how to forge iron.
The weaver didn't have to learn how to blow glass.
Exactly. They didn't have to change careers or move to a new city. They just shifted to making a slightly different, more refined version of what they already knew how to do.
You know what it's like. It's like a local family-owned burger joint surviving a giant, massive-scale McDonald's opening right next door.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The local joint doesn't panic, tear down their entire kitchen, and try to become a sushi restaurant.
No, because they don't know anything about sushi.
Right. They don't have to suddenly learn how to source and roll raw fish. That would be insane. And they'd probably go bankrupt trying to learn a totally new trade.
Exactly. They know how to operate a grill. They know how to handle meat. That is their core competence.
So instead of fighting McDonald's on who can make the cheapest 99-cent cheeseburger, which is a war, they will absolutely lose.
They will get crushed.
They just shift slightly within their own ecosystem. They start making high-end $20 Wagyu truffle burgers with artisanal brioche buns.
Yes. They completely cede the cheap fast food burger market to McDonald's, and they absolutely monopolize the luxury sit-down burger market.
And the beauty of that is the pain of the economic shock is entirely absorbed. It is minimized. The cooks keep their jobs. The restaurant stays open. The ecosystem just divides into distinct niches.
The French workers essentially did the exact same thing in 1860.
But here is a critical detail from the study that I absolutely love.
Oh, the counterattack.
Yes, the desperate counterattack of the fragile. Because before this treaty was signed, the industries that screamed the loudest, the bosses who swore they were going to be completely wiped out.
They were the cotton and silk manufacturers.
Right. Oh, they were convinced they were marked for death.
They were the ones lobbying the hardest for the 58 import bans.
Yeah.
They swore up and down that without government protection, British textiles would put them in the grave in a matter of months.
But the data in this paper proves the exact opposite. It's so ironic. The researchers measured how well these specific sectors adapted to finding their new niche. They used an adaptation index from 0 to 1.
And how did silk do?
The silk industry, the very people crying that they're the most fragile and helpless, hit an adaptation index of 0.32.
Which, in economic terms, is a massive, incredibly rapid pivot.
The weakest industries adapted the fastest because they had no other choice.
They realized the government umbrella was gone.
Right. They instantly abandoned the unwinnable war of mass scale with Britain, and they went all in on quality, intricate design, and specialized finishing.
And because of that, they exploded with fierce vitality.
They thrive.
Okay, I have to stop you there, because this raises a massive red flag for me.
What's that?
If these French factory bosses were perfectly capable of surviving all along, I mean,
Right.
if they had the capital, the skilled workers, and the ingenuity to pivot and dominate the luxury market,
Yeah.
why did they cry so loudly before 1860? Why did they act like the world was ending?
Because the panic was a lie. A lie to protect their monopoly money.
Exactly. The researchers pierce right through the historical noise and the political theater here.
It was all theater.
The industrial bosses weren't wailing because they genuinely feared starvation or bankruptcy. They were wailing because they loved what economists call rent-seeking.
Rent-seeking. Okay, explain that term for us because it's really crucial here.
Sure. Rent-seeking is when a company or an individual tries to increase their own wealth without actually creating any new wealth or value for society.
So they aren't building a better product.
Right. In this case, it means making money simply because the government has banned your competition.
Ah.
Those high tariffs and absolute import bans were a giant protection umbrella. It allowed French factory owners to charge incredibly high prices for relatively mediocre basic goods.
Simply because the French consumer had no other legal option.
Exactly. They were lazy, they didn't have to innovate, they didn't have to create better designs, and they didn't have to be efficient.
They just sat back and collected high profits because the government kept the British out.
Precisely. The second emperor, Napoleon III, rips that protective umbrella away. These supposedly fragile businesses miraculously discovered they had incredible powers of innovation.
The threat of actual competition forced them to get off the couch and actually compete.
And they did.
This raises such an important question for you listening. How much of today's political panic over foreign trade is actual fear of ruin, and how much is just corporate billionaires wanting to keep their monopoly profits?
It really forces you to look at every single tariff debate today with deep, deep suspicion.
Absolutely.
When a massive corporation today lobbies the government to slap a 50% tariff on a foreign competitor, claiming it's to, protect domestic jobs.
You have to ask, are we really protecting workers? Or are we just protecting a billionaire's lazy, guaranteed profit margin?
Are we just enabling rent-seeking? It's a terrifying thought.
Because the French workers were perfectly fine once the pivot happened. It was only the lazy bosses who lost their easy money initially. But the story doesn't stop in France. Because the 1860 Cobden-Chevalier Treaty didn't just expose the French bosses, it triggered a massive continent-wide chain reaction.
A two-nation secret handshake accidentally forced the whole world to level up.
Let's give a little context to what Europe looked like in 1859, right before this treaty. Because it wasn't the European Union we know today.
No, it was highly fractured. Imagine Europe in 1859 not as a unified market, but as a fractured puzzle of tiny toll booths.
Toll booths everywhere.
Almost every nation had massive tariff walls up against every other nation. Trade was sluggish, it was expensive, and incredibly bureaucratic.
But the 1860 treaty between Britain and France included something called the Most Favored Nation Clause.
Yes.
Explain how this specific clause acted as a detonator for the whole continent.
The Most Favored Nation Clause is brilliant in its simplicity. France and Britain agreed that if either of them ever negotiated a lower tariff with a third country in the future,
Okay.
they would automatically give that same lower rate to each other.
So if France later decides to let Belgium iron in for a 5% tariff, they automatically have to lower the British tariff to 5% as well.
Exactly. Now think about this from the perspective of the rest of Europe.
Okay.
Suddenly, Britain and France, the two biggest economies in Europe, are trading with each other at massive discounts. If you are Belgium or Italy or the German Zollverein.
Wait, the German Zollverein? Just quickly, what was that?
The Zollverein was a coalition of German states formed to manage tariffs and economic policies within their territories. Germany wasn't a fully unified single country yet, so this customs union was their massive economic bloc.
Got it. So the German Zollverein, Belgium, Italy, they're sitting on the sidelines watching France and Britain trade cheaply.
Right.
They must have been terrified of being completely boxed out of the market.
They were absolutely terrified because if Belgian goods still faced a 20% tariff in France, but British goods only faced a 7% tariff,
The Belgian factories would go bankrupt.
they couldn't compete. It was
Yeah.
impossible.
So what did they do?
They panicked, and they frantically signed their own free trade treaties with France and Britain.
Just to level the playing field.
Exactly, making sure to include their own most favored nation clauses.
Is a domino effect.
A massive one. Within a decade, Europe was webbed with these intersecting treaties. Without meaning to, this secret, highly controversial treaty signed by 6 men birthed the very first wave of true global free trade.
It detonated a golden age of economic expansion across Europe.
It really did.
And perhaps the most shocking part of this entire historical data set is the social reaction, or rather, the total lack of it.
Yeah, this is wild.
It brought 20 years of absolute silence.
Yes, from 1860 up until the late 1870s, there was essentially zero massive anti-globalization backlash in France.
Why did the devastated masses never light their torches? You'd think that opening the borders to the British juggernaut would have sparked a huge protectionist revolution.
You really would think so.
But there were no riots in the streets, no massive political movements demanding the tariffs be brought back. Why?
The reason is cold, rational, and intensely real. When the working class doesn't have to pay the ultimate bloody price of changing entire industries just to eat,
Yeah,
society simply does not tear itself apart.
that is profound.
When every niche worker, the dyer, the weaver, the glassblower,
When they can survive simply by pivoting to a higher quality product within their own familiar field.
there is no rage. There's just adaptation. The anxiety disappears because the transition is manageable.
Now we look in the mirror. Because if you understand the triumph of 1860s France, you instantly understand the tragedy of our modern world.
This is the mirror of modern tragedy.
If you understand how the French working class survived through that smooth adjustment, you instantly understand the profound rage and anxiety of today's middle class.
It maps perfectly.
Why is it so different today? Why can't a worker in a modern manufacturing town just pivot to luxury like the French silk weavers did?
Because the nature of global competition has fundamentally mutated. In 1860, the British were fighting for scale in the basic markets. They left the high-end, bespoke, complex markets largely alone, which gave the French a place to retreat to. There was still space in the ecosystem.
But today's global competition isn't about finding a nice little niche. It's a ruthless winner-takes-all bloodbath.
Exactly. Modern global rivals, whether they are multinational mega corporations or heavily subsidized foreign state industries, they use extreme low prices, vast technological scale, and total supply chain domination to crush absolutely everything.
They don't just want the cheap burger market. They want the mid-tier market, the luxury Wagyu market, the supply chain that delivers the beef, and the software that takes the order.
They want it all. They leave the older established workers zero room for that beautiful, painless, smooth adjustment.
If a foreign mega factory can produce both the cheap basic goods and the high-end luxury goods cheaper than you can, where do you pivot?
You don't. The ecosystem isn't dividing anymore. It is being completely paved over.
When the space to be different dies, the real pain begins. That is why the factory worker in Ohio or the mid-level accountant or the graphic designer feel so much danger right now.
It's not just that competition is here. It's that there's nowhere left to pivot within their own industry.
That is the core of the modern anxiety. The ladder has been pulled up.
It has.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the 160-year-old data from France slaps us awake with a cruel truth. What is our knee-jerk reaction today when we feel this pain?
We demand tariffs. We demand trade wars.
We want to build giant walls. But building giant tariff walls to protect yourself from a superior competitor is a guaranteed way to make yourself fragile and weak.
It is the exact opposite of what you need to do to survive.
Really?
Protectionism breeds stagnation. It encourages that rent-seeking behavior we talked about, where companies stop innovating and just rely on the government to keep them artificially alive.
So what is the actual cure? When a domestic industry faces a devastating competitive advantage from an opponent, a competitor so massive and cheap it feels impossible to beat, what do?
You look at the only mechanism that has historically worked. You either evolve into a new species, or you are completely erased from the earth.
The only antidote to a dimensional strike.
The real cure is to use the brief moment of crisis to aggressively splinter your industry.
You must abandon the low-value fight entirely.
Entirely.
You must mutate into an entirely new, high-value, irreplaceable species. Just like the French weavers abandoning plain cotton for complex, chemically dyed high-fashion prints.
Exactly. You have to find the one thing the massive, scaled-up competitor cannot do.
Whether that's localized customization, ultra-high-tech service, deep specialized knowledge, or extreme quality.
And you have to run toward it as fast as possible.
It elevates the entire discussion. It forces us to look past the illusion of empires and understand the world's underlying logic. The fate of a nation or an industry or even an individual career isn't decided by the thickness of its shields.
It is decided by its elasticity to pain.
Elasticity. I love that word for this. Whether we are talking about the 19th century British Empire flooding Europe with cheap cotton, a modern superpower dominating global manufacturing, or the terrifying exponential tidal wave of artificial intelligence that is about to hit the white-collar world.
The flood of technology and capital will never, ever stop.
You cannot build a wall high enough to keep the future out.
What prevents a society from collapsing isn't how hard it gets hit. It is the society's internal elasticity.
Its ability to safely absorb the pain of change within its existing structures without forcing its people into the abyss of total ruin. Its ability to facilitate that smooth adjustment for its citizens.
Which brings us to the ultimate question.
Are we repeating history?
Are we?
Is the modern world repeating the darkest, most paranoid parts of history, but with none of the benefits?
The French working class survived because they found a niche. The historical data from Becuwe, Blancheton, and Meissner proves it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
The tariffs fell, the market flooded, and the workers adapted and thrived.
But look around today. We are frantically throwing up massive trade walls. We are trying to block out cheap goods and foreign tech.
We claim, just like Adolf Thiers did in 1860, that we are protecting fragile industries and saving the working class.
Are we just infected with the exact same panic the French bosses had in 1859?
When we lobby for massive tariffs today, are we really saving jobs, or are we just protecting the monopolies of billionaires who don't want to innovate?
It is a question every citizen needs to ask when they hear politicians promise to protect them with trade walls.
And perhaps more terrifyingly, as we look at the horizon, before artificial intelligence totally replaces our jobs and fundamentally rewrites the global economy, do we still have the time and the space to find our own smooth adjustment?
Can we still mutate into something irreplaceable? Or has the ecosystem already been paved over?
That is the defining challenge of our generation. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Think about this as you look at the news today. Keep questioning the historical narratives you hear. Because sometimes the cure to our biggest anxieties is hiding in the very past we completely misunderstood.